6 men had fallen before Chuck Norris in less than a single month. One never saw the strike coming. Another woke up staring at the ceiling, unable to remember where he was. A third sat motionless in a locker room for nearly an hour, replaying the same terrifying question inside his head. What exactly had hit him? Crowds cheered. Newspapers celebrated. Gyms across America repeated the same name over and over again. Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris. The name carried weight now. Danger. Certainty. The kind of certainty that made grown men hesitate before stepping into a ring. But years later, when Chuck sat alone replaying the biggest moments of his life, none of those victories returned to haunt him. Not the championships, not the standing ovations, not the opponents he had crushed, not even the fear he had placed inside other fighters. Only one memory remained. One. A single moment. A single pair of eyes. A single realization so disturbing that it followed him for the rest of his life. Because there had once been a man who looked directly into his soul and moved before Chuck himself knew what he was about to do. Not reacting, not countering, not guessing. Knowing. As though the future had already happened for him. And for the first time in Chuck Norris's life, fear entered the room. Not fear of injury, not fear of losing. Something worse. The fear of discovering that another human being existed on a level he couldn't even understand. Because pain can be survived, defeat can be survived, humiliation can be survived. But discovering that everything you built your identity around might be incomplete, that kind of wound reaches much deeper. And it all began during a summer that felt cursed. Los Angeles baked beneath an unforgiving sun. The air itself felt heavy. Cars radiated heat. Concrete shimmered. Every street seemed exhausted. Even the city looked angry. Yet nowhere was that tension felt more strongly than inside the martial arts world. Because violence was becoming entertainment. And nobody delivered violence more convincingly than Chuck Norris. By then, he had become something larger than a champion. He had become a phenomenon. Every tournament seemed to end the same way. Another opponent falling. Another crowd erupting, another trophy lifted high above his head. People didn't simply admire him, they feared him. The difference mattered. Inside martial arts schools, instructors lowered their voices when discussing him. Students copied his footwork. Fighters studied his kicks frame by frame. Promoters secretly hoped he entered their events because ticket sales exploded whenever his name appeared. Yet behind all the admiration, another truth quietly grew. Chuck was beginning to believe his own legend. At first it happened slowly, almost invisibly. A little more confidence after each victory. A little more certainty after each knockout. A little less doubt. A little less humility. Then, eventually, no doubt remained at all. He wasn't merely winning anymore. He expected to win, expected it. The distinction was dangerous, because once a fighter stops questioning himself, growth begins to die. Chuck didn't know that yet. Nobody around him dared tell him. People praised him too much, feared him too much, admired him too much. And then another name started spreading. At first, Chuck ignored it. The stories sounded exaggerated. Some called him the most complete martial artist they had ever seen. Others described movements that sounded impossible. There were whispers, rumors, Stories. The kind of stories that usually surrounded myths rather than men. Chuck dismissed them immediately. Every generation created legends. Most legends fell apart when pressure arrived. But something strange happened. The stories didn't disappear. They multiplied. Everywhere Chuck went, somebody mentioned the same man. Gyms, competitions, training halls, private conversations, magazine interviews. One name kept appearing, again and again and again. Eventually, curiosity turned into irritation. Because admiration was one thing, worship was another. And people were beginning to talk as if Chuck Norris existed above ordinary fighters. That bothered Chuck more than he wanted to admit. Not because he feared the man, because he disliked the mythology surrounding him. To Chuck, fighting was simple. Pressure, timing, discipline, impact, reality. You proved yourself against resistance, not speeches, not theories, not philosophy. Results. Only results mattered. One afternoon, Chuck sat inside a cramped office across from a martial arts journalist. The room smelled of stale coffee and old paper. Sunlight leaked through dusty blinds. A recorder spun quietly between them. The interview had already lasted nearly an hour. Then the reporter adjusted his glasses. His body language changed. Chuck noticed immediately. A difficult question was coming. "I'd like your opinion on someone." Chuck leaned back. "Go ahead." The journalist hesitated, then finally spoke the name. Chuck Norris. For a brief second, the room seemed smaller. Not because Chuck was angry, because he was tired of hearing the name. The reporter noticed the tiny smile forming at the corner of Chuck's mouth. A dangerous smile. The kind opponents often saw before things became painful. "What about him?" The journalist swallowed. "People say he's changing martial arts." Chuck laughed softly. Not loudly, not kindly. Just enough. The reporter suddenly felt nervous. Chuck folded his arms, his shoulders relaxed, but his eyes sharpened. "People say a lot of things." The journalist nodded carefully. "So, what do you think?" Chuck stared through the window for several seconds, then finally answered, "He's talented." The reporter looked surprised. Chuck continued, "Very talented." Another pause, then everything changed. But talent and domination aren't the same thing. The room grew silent. Chuck leaned forward. The recorder captured every word, every syllable, every ounce of confidence. "If we ever fought seriously," his voice became colder, "it wouldn't last long." The journalist's pen froze. "How long?" Chuck answered instantly. "Less than half a minute." Silence. The kind of silence that fills a room after something irreversible has been said. The reporter felt it immediately. But Chuck wasn't finished. His confidence had momentum now, and momentum can be dangerous. People confuse demonstrations with combat. His eyes narrowed. "I've faced men trying to tear my head off." The room felt tense. Then came the sentence that would eventually follow him for years. The sentence he would later wish he had never spoken. "My speed and power would overwhelm him." The words landed like a hammer. Heavy, absolute, final. The interview ended, but the consequences were only beginning. Within days, the article exploded across the martial arts world. Arguments erupted everywhere. Students debated. Instructors argued. Fighters picked sides. Some agreed with Chuck. Others defended Norris with near-religious passion. It felt less like a disagreement and more like a war slowly approaching. And eventually, the magazine reached Chuck Norris himself. He was teaching when a student handed it to him. The room grew quiet immediately. Everyone watched, waiting, expecting anger, expecting frustration, expecting pride. Instead, Chuck smiled. And somehow that was far more unsettling. Because those who knew him best understood a frightening truth. The calmer Chuck became, the more dangerous he usually was. He slowly closed the magazine, looked around the room, then said something nobody expected. An insecure man needs to prove he's strong. Silence. The students exchanged confused glances. Chuck's eyes drifted toward the training floor. A confident man already knows. Nobody spoke. Something had changed. The atmosphere felt different now. He walked toward a telephone, reached for the receiver, and dialed a number. Far across Los Angeles, a phone began to ring, and with every ring, two worlds moved closer to collision. One carried confidence, the other carried understanding. One carried pride, the other carried something far more dangerous. And neither man realized that before the week ended, everything would change. The day arrived beneath a sky that looked strangely colorless. Even the sunlight felt different, muted, heavy, as if Los Angeles itself sensed something unusual was about to happen. Chuck Lewis arrived first, not because he was eager, because champions hated waiting. His black car rolled to a stop outside the gym. The building looked disappointing, too ordinary, too small, too quiet. Chuck stepped out and stared at it for a moment. This was it? This was the place people talked about with such reverence? No trophies were visible through the windows, no banners, no expensive equipment, no signs of greatness, just worn walls, old wood, and silence. A small smile appeared on Chuck's face. Maybe the stories really had been exaggerated. Behind him, several of his students exited another vehicle. All wore confident expressions. They expected their teacher to dominate, to expose the myth, to settle the debate once and for all. Chuck pushed open the door. The smell hit him instantly. Sweat, leather, dust, hard work. The scent of a place where people actually trained. Inside, conversations stopped. Every head turned. The room immediately became quiet, not uncomfortable, watchful. Like a forest going silent when a predator enters. 15 people stood around the edges of the gym. Students, fighters, observers. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then Chuck saw him. Standing near the center of the room, barefoot, relaxed. No dramatic entrance, no intimidating posture, no attempt to look powerful. And yet, somehow, the entire room revolved around him, not through fear, through presence. That disturbed Chuck more than he expected, because real authority was usually loud. This wasn't. This felt different. Chuck Norris stepped forward calmly. His expression remained polite, almost welcoming. He extended his hand. "Thank you for coming." Chuck shook it, harder than necessary, a subtle challenge, a message hidden inside a handshake. But Norris didn't react, not even slightly.
The calm smile remained. And somehow that felt like losing a tiny battle before the real one had even begun.
"I wanted to see whether the stories were true," Chuck said. Norris nodded. "And now?" Chuck looked around dismissively. "I'm still deciding." Several students stiffened immediately. The tension became visible, but Norris never changed expression, not even for a second. That unnerved Chuck. Most fighters reacted when challenged. Most fighters defended themselves. Most fighters protected their pride. This man didn't. It was as if criticism simply couldn't reach him. Norris walked toward the center of the gym. His movements were casual, natural, effortless. Then he stopped. "Let's begin." Chuck rolled his shoulders. Finally, the moment had arrived. His students exchanged excited glances. The observers leaned forward. Everyone expected sparring, a challenge, a fight, something. Instead, Norris calmly said 4 words. "I want you to hit me." The room froze. Chuck blinked.
"What?"
"Hit me." Chuck stared at him. "That's it?" Norris nodded. "1 strike." The room became even quieter. Chuck frowned. "What are you going to do?" Norris lowered his hands completely. "Nothing." Several students exchanged nervous looks. Chuck actually laughed. "You serious?" "Completely." The answer arrived without hesitation, without doubt, without ego. That irritated Chuck immediately, because it felt disrespectful, not insulting, worse, dismissive, as though Norris didn't consider him dangerous enough to defend against. Chuck stepped forward, slowly. The atmosphere shifted instantly. His body changed. His breathing slowed. His balance settled. His muscles tightened. This wasn't tournament movement anymore. This wasn't practice. This was combat. Everyone in the room felt it. Even Norris's students looked nervous. Chuck fixed his eyes directly on the center of Norris's face, visualized impact, measured distance, calculated timing. 1 perfect punch. That was all he needed. 1. His lungs filled with air, his weight shifted. Then he exploded. The punch launched forward like a bullet, fast, violent, precise. A strike capable of ending conversations permanently. And then, nothing. His fist tore through empty space. No impact, no resistance, no target. Nothing. Chuck's eyes widened. For a fraction of a second, his brain refused to process what had happened, because Norris wasn't there anymore. Not backward, not downward, not where he should have been. Gone. Completely gone. The room stopped breathing. Chuck felt something near his throat. He slowly turned his head. 2 fingers, barely an inch away. Norris stood beside him, relaxed, balanced, calm, as if he had been standing there the entire time. A chill traveled down Chuck's spine. The message was obvious. If those fingers had been a real strike, the exchange would already be over. Chuck stepped backward immediately. His heartbeat accelerated. Impossible. Nobody moved that fast. Nobody. Norris lowered his hand. Again. The single word echoed through the room. Chuck's pride erupted. Again? Fine. This time there would be no mistake. This time there would be no underestimating. He launched forward instantly. Jab, cross, hook, low kick. A brutal combination delivered with enough force to break bones. The attacks came fast, very fast, fast enough to overwhelm almost anyone alive. But Norris moved through them like smoke. The jab missed, the cross missed, the hook missed. The kick touched nothing but air. Every strike found emptiness. Every attack arrived too late. Every opening vanished before Chuck could exploit it. The room remained silent. Only the sound of movement filled the air. Breathing, footsteps, air being sliced apart by failed attacks. Chuck attacked harder, faster, more aggressively. His combinations became vicious, relentless, dangerous. But something horrifying began happening. Norris wasn't merely avoiding him. He was reading him. Every movement, every intention, every decision, before it happened. And after each failed attack, Norris appeared near another vulnerable target. Jaw, temple, eyes, ribs, throat. Never touching, only showing, teaching, demonstrating, controlling. The realization was terrifying. Chuck wasn't chasing Norris. He was being guided. Like a man trapped inside a maze designed by someone else. Sweat began forming on his forehead. Then came the moment he would remember for the rest of his life. Chuck threw his fastest right hand. The punch that had flattened champions. The punch people feared. The punch he trusted more than anything. It exploded forward. And suddenly, time seemed to slow. Norris moved. Not after. Before. Before the punch fully existed. Before the attack completed. Before Chuck himself finished committing to it. His palm stopped less than an inch from Chuck's face. The gym became silent. Absolutely silent. Chuck froze. Because for one horrifying moment, he felt something he had never experienced before. Not defeat. Not pain. Exposure. As if another human being had opened his skull and read every thought inside. His pulse hammered against his ribs. His breathing became uneven. For the first time that day, fear entered the room. Not visible fear, the deeper kind. The kind born when certainty begins to die. Chuck stepped backward, slowly. His students looked confused, concerned, disturbed. They had never seen their teacher look uncertain. Never. Norris tilted his head slightly. "Do you know why you cannot touch me?" Chuck said nothing, because suddenly he wanted the answer, more than he wanted victory. Norris stepped forward, calmly. "You announce every attack." Chuck frowned. The statement felt absurd, yet somehow it didn't. Norris lightly touched his shoulder. "This moves first. Then his hips. Then this. Then his chest. And finally, he pointed toward Chuck's eyes. Your intention appears here." A cold sensation spread through Chuck's body. Nobody had ever explained him so perfectly. Nobody. Norris stepped backward. "You trained yourself into patterns." The room remained frozen. "Beautiful patterns." His voice remained gentle. "Powerful patterns."
A pause. Then came the sentence that shattered something deep inside Chuck. But patterns can be read. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. For the first time in years, Chuck Lewis felt small. Not weak. Not defeated. Small. And standing there in that gym, watching a man who moved as though he existed outside ordinary timing, a terrifying realization began forming. Maybe he wasn't facing a fighter at all. Maybe he was standing in front of someone who had already solved combat itself. And the worst part? Deep down, Chuck was beginning to believe it. The silence inside the gym felt heavier than any punch Chuck Lewis had ever taken. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The air itself seemed frozen. Only the distant hum of traffic outside reminded everyone that the world was still turning. Chuck stood in the center of the room. Sweat rolled down his temples. His chest rose and fell. But the exhaustion wasn't physical. That was the frightening part. His body still had strength. His lungs still had air. His fists still carried power. Yet something deeper was failing. Something he had spent years building. His certainty. Across the room, his students exchanged nervous glances. They didn't understand what they were witnessing, at least not completely. They had seen Chuck defeat powerful men. They had seen him dominate champions. They had seen opponents crumble beneath pressure. But they had never seen this. Never seen their teacher look lost. And Chuck knew it. He could feel their confusion, their concern, their disbelief. Meanwhile, Chuck Norris looked exactly the same as when the day began. Calm, relaxed, untouched, not even breathing harder. That reality hurt more than any defeat. Because deep inside, Chuck was beginning to understand something horrifying. Norris wasn't winning. Winning implied struggle. Winning implied danger. Winning implied effort. This wasn't that. From the very beginning, Norris had been in complete control. Every angle, every movement, every exchange, every second. The realization landed like a hammer. Chuck hadn't been fighting Norris. He had been participating in a lesson. And somehow, that made everything worse. Norris walked calmly toward a heavy bag hanging from the ceiling. The leather was old, scarred, covered with years of impact. He stopped beside it, then looked toward Chuck. "You are powerful." The statement was sincere. No sarcasm, no mockery, no hidden insult. Most fighters would already be unconscious after those combinations. Chuck said nothing, because praise no longer mattered. Not now. Norris lightly touched the heavy bag. But power can become a prison. The words echoed inside the room. A prison. Chuck frowned. Nobody had ever described strength that way before. Norris stepped closer to the bag. His fist hovered only inches away from the leather. There was no room, no distance, no momentum. Nothing. Chuck crossed his arms. Curiosity began replacing frustration. "What are you doing?" Norris glanced at him. "Watching." Then it happened. An explosion. A violent crack thundered through the gym. The heavy bag folded inward violently. Chains rattled overhead. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Several students physically jumped. Chuck's eyes widened. His brain struggled to process what he had just seen. There had been no wind-up, No preparation, no visible power generation. Nothing. Just destruction. Instant. Pure. Effortless. The bag continued swinging wildly. "What the hell was that?" one student whispered. Norris looked toward him. "Efficiency." The room remained silent. Chuck slowly approached the bag. His fingertips touched the trembling leather. He had spent years studying power. Years. And somehow, everything he knew suddenly felt incomplete. Norris looked directly at him. "Every unnecessary movement gives information." Chuck listened. Really listened. For the first time. Every unnecessary motion tells your opponent what is coming. He pointed toward Chuck's shoulders. "Your body speaks before your strikes arrive." Then toward his hips. "Your weight shifts." Then toward his eyes. "Your intention appears." Chuck felt something uncomfortable inside his chest, because every word was true. Every single word. Norris stepped closer. "Attack again." Normally, Chuck would have moved immediately, without hesitation, without thought. But now, he hesitated. And the moment he realized it, he felt another crack form inside his ego. Norris smiled. "You are thinking now." Chuck frowned. Before today, that sentence would have sounded ridiculous. Now it sounded important. Norris continued. "Before, your ego was fighting." The words struck harder than any punch, because they were true. Every attack, every challenge, every boast, every victory, everything had been feeding the same thing. His image, his reputation, his identity. Chuck attacked suddenly. A vicious side kick exploded toward Norris's ribs, fast, precise, powerful. The kind of kick that had broken opponents. Norris moved, barely. His hand redirected the attack by inches. Only inches. Yet somehow those inches changed everything. Chuck lost balance, only for a moment. But a moment was enough. Suddenly, Norris's fist stopped less than an inch from his nose. Again. Always an inch away. Always complete control. Always restraint. Chuck froze. His heartbeat thundered. Norris lowered his hand. "You see?" Chuck stared. "No." The answer surprised even him. Years earlier, he would never have admitted ignorance. Never. Norris smiled. "Good." The room looked confused, but Chuck understood. For the first time in years, he had become teachable. Norris turned toward the students watching from the walls. "The moment a fighter believes he understands everything," his eyes returned to Chuck, "his growth ends." Silence. Heavy. Meaningful. Chuck lowered his gaze, because he knew exactly who those words were meant for. Then Norris said something that changed everything. "Your biggest problem is not technique." Chuck looked up. "Then what is it?" Norris stepped closer, close enough that nobody could miss the seriousness in his eyes. "You built your identity around being superior." The sentence hit like a train. Direct, precise, impossible to avoid. Chuck immediately looked away, because no counter-argument existed.
Every championship, every trophy, every headline, every standing ovation, they had slowly become something dangerous. An addiction. Not to fighting, not to learning, not to growth.
An addiction to feeling untouchable. Norris continued. And when a man becomes addicted to superiority, his voice softened, learning becomes impossible. The gym fell silent again. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. Because everyone understood they were witnessing something far bigger than martial arts. This wasn't about combat anymore. This was about identity, about truth, about ego. Chuck swallowed hard, then finally asked the question that had been growing inside him all day. How long did you know? Norris tilted his head. Know what? That I couldn't touch you. The room became completely still. Norris answered immediately. The moment you walked through the door. The honesty hit like a knife. Yet strangely, it also felt clean. No lies, no games, no illusion. Just truth. And for the first time all day, Chuck stopped resisting it. Minutes passed. Neither man spoke. Finally, one of Chuck's students stepped forward nervously. Sensei? His voice sounded small.
Are we leaving?
Chuck turned toward him. Then something happened that nobody in the room expected. His shoulders relaxed. The tension disappeared. The fight was over. Not because someone had won, because someone had learned. Chuck slowly looked back at Norris. The arrogance was gone, the pride was gone, the need to prove himself was gone. Only honesty remained. He took a slow breath, then asked the most important question of his life. What happens now? Norris smiled. A genuine smile, warm, almost fatherly. That depends. On what? Norris's eyes sharpened. Whether your ego wants revenge, a pause, or your mind wants growth. The question cut deeper than anything else that day. For several long moments, Chuck said nothing. Inside him, two versions of himself fought for control. One wanted to protect his image, the other wanted the truth. One wanted comfort, the other wanted growth. One wanted yesterday, the other wanted tomorrow. Finally, the battle ended. Chuck stepped forward. The room watched. Nobody breathed. Nobody blinked. Even his students looked stunned, because they sensed something historic was about to happen. Chuck looked directly into Norris's eyes and spoke with a level of honesty he had never shown before. If you'll allow it, his voice was quieter now, stronger somehow. I want to learn. Silence. Then Norris smiled. Not proudly, not victoriously, respectfully. He extended his hand. This time, the meaning was different. No challenge, no competition, no dominance. Only respect. Chuck took it, and in that single moment, everything changed. Years later, people would ask Chuck Lewis about that day. Interviewers, champions, students, friends. Everyone wanted the same answer. Was Chuck Norris really that good? Every time the question came, Chuck's expression changed. The confidence remained, but humility appeared beside it. And eventually he gave the answer that stunned generations. No. The interviewer blinked.
No?
Chuck smiled. then looked into the distance. He was far better than people realize. Silence. Then he added the sentence that stayed with listeners forever. The scary thing wasn't his speed. A pause. It wasn't his power. Another pause. It was his awareness. Chuck's eyes lowered slightly. Being around him felt like standing beside someone who could see the decision before the movement. The interviewer sat speechless. Then Chuck gave one final reflection, the one that haunted him most. The frightening part, his voice became quieter, was that he was still learning. Still learning. Despite everything, despite his skill, despite his mastery, despite standing above almost everyone around him, he was still evolving. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. Because true masters never believe they have arrived. True greatness never stops growing. True strength never needs to announce itself. And true wisdom begins the moment ego finally dies. Chuck Lewis walked into that gym believing he was the hunter. He walked out understanding a truth that would follow him forever. Chuck Norris had never been the prey. He had been the storm.